Hello, I'm Bruce. Right now I'm 21 years old, and I'm happy. But just a few years ago, I was broke, alone, and homeless. And all of it was because of my mother. Since I could remember, my mom didn't really care about me. We always had some food at home, but that was it. She never talked to me or asked me any questions unless she needed something. She would also berate me if I broke something or talked too loudly. Once she was supposed to pick me up from school in the middle of the winter, but she forgot, and I had to walk all the way home because I had no money. I was wet and cold and got sick for several weeks. And she did buy me medicine, but then forced me to go to school because it was too big of a hassle for her if I stayed at home. It was confusing and painful to me when I was a kid, but I had gotten used to it by the time I got older. When I became a teenager, I was rarely at home. I was always hanging out with my friends, sometimes for the whole night because, well, nobody cared if I was at home or not. So I could do whatever I wanted as long as I didn't create any problems for my mom. I was bad at school, but I was doing barely enough so that my teachers wouldn't call her. I wasn't hanging out outside all the time because I wanted to. Pretty often, it was because I didn't feel like I had a home. My mom always had men in her life, and they would come and go every few years. So it felt like I was just the tenant in a house of two strangers. With my stepfathers, it was like they were literally strangers. But with my mom, just felt like it. Well, I was at least thankful to them for not messing with me and for leaving me alone. But this all changed when I was 17 and she started to date an ex-military man. And boy, was he strict. He had all these rules, like specific times I had to come home and that I suddenly had chores to do at home. He was constantly telling me how he would make a man out of me and how spoiled I was. I hated him, and I ignored his rules. One day, I came home pretty late, and he was waiting for me, red with anger. I didn't even get why. I mean, it wasn't even his house. Anyway, he started to lecture me on how I should obey his rules because he was the man of the house. He was so loud, my mother woke up. I rolled my eyes until he warned me that I would have to leave this house as soon as I turned 18. I couldn't believe it. I looked at my mother waiting for some kind of support, but she just went back to her room without saying anything. He got so angry at me that he made me run laps in the middle of the night around our house, shouting at me at the same time. Mom came out again, but all she did was ask us to be quieter because she wanted to sleep. Good thing that it was raining, because nobody could see my tears. The next few months, I was afraid of both being in the house and being out of it. It was just constant anxiety and anger. I finally turned 18 and was waiting every day to be kicked out. But my stepfather was feeling generous. Or to be more precise, my mother asked him to be a little softer. So the new deal was that if I wanted to stay longer, I had to pay for my room. I agreed because this was the only place I could afford right now. Any other room I tried to find would cost more. It was really hard to find a job. I worked at a fast food joint for a while, but I was so miserable with my situation at home that it was hard to talk with people. So eventually I started a job at a factory. It had terrible pay and a terrible schedule, but I had no choice. So I continued to work there. It was better than being at home. Every night I returned from my work, my stepfather would continue to annoy me with his rules, and my mother would agree with him about how stupid and useless I was, only taking up space. I hated them with a passion, and would have cried myself to sleep every night, except I was too tired to feel anything. One day, I forgot my keys at home, and after I returned home from a 12-hour shift, I called my mother to open the door for me, but she said she was out and that I had to wait. I was waiting on our front porch for a few hours and eventually fell asleep, exhausted from work. I was woken up by them returning and being angry at me for sleeping on the front porch like I was homeless. They were miserable together and decided to get a dog because, yeah, they needed someone to care about. How ironic that they treated this poor small dog better than me. And by better, I mean that they screamed at it a little less often than they did at me. So anyway, one night when I was trying to fall asleep, my stepfather opened the door and was shouting at me for leaving dirty dishes in the sink. I ignored him until he left to walk with the dog. And that's when I decided that enough was enough. And I went to the kitchen and I smashed all those dirty plates that I couldn't clean because I was exhausted from work. My mom came out to see what was happening and started berating and screaming at me, but I ignored her. I packed all my stuff, took my bag, and left the house without saying goodbye. I stayed in a dirty, loud hostel for a few days, and it was even worse. I'd come from a loud factory to a loud hostel and was just constantly tired. But it was better than living with my mother and her boyfriend. After a while, I rented myself a room and immediately felt better. It was quiet and nobody would barge in the middle of the night. Work still sucked, but I didn't care. I devoted all my free time studying how to code. I knew I couldn't apply to a university in my current situation, and programming is well paid, so it was the best choice I could make. My life gradually got better. After a year of living like that, changing jobs, and spending all my free time learning to code, I finally got a better job and found a great girlfriend, Eve, who made me incredibly happy. Eventually, we rented a small apartment together. It was all great until my mother reappeared in my life. She called me one day, almost crying. Just hearing her voice made me sweat and tremble with anxiety. The army man had left her and she was all alone and lonely and had financial problems. I was hesitant about whether I wanted to be in contact with her again, but Eve thought that it might be a good idea. Maybe she had changed. So Eve and I went together to meet my mother. She looked bad, like 10 years older. It was almost uncomfortable how she was hugging me and acting like she missed me. She had never done that in my entire life. I was silently sitting the whole evening while my mother was chatting with Eve, telling her funny stories from my childhood. They weren't funny to me. I felt physically sick being in this house. I also wondered where the dog was. Did the army man take it or something worse? Anyway, I felt sorry for it. But then I thought, maybe she really did change. Maybe being completely alone showed her how wrong she was. So I decided to give her a chance. I would talk with her on the phone once a week and would visit her once a month, and even started to help her with money for a little bit. And she did act like she was grateful. Once I went to see her alone, and she started to say insulting things about Eve, how she wasn't good enough for me, and that she was just using me, and that I should break up with her. And get this, my mother wanted me to move back in with her. I was surprised by this, because usually she was always very friendly to Eve. When I tried to defend Eve, my mother called me ungrateful, and said that she didn't even want me to be born. It was incredibly painful to realize that she hadn't changed at all, and that I had just spent so much energy on her out of guilt and the belief that she wasn't a narcissistic, toxic person who neglected me my whole life. So I told my mom everything I thought about her. I was speaking loudly for about a half an hour, and then I was getting my things together, preparing to leave. At that moment, my mom ran to me and pretended to fall. She was laying on the floor and crying about everyone abandoning her. She looked like a little baby, but I felt absolutely nothing. After some time, she stood up and tried to hug me, but I stepped back. At this point, I left without showing any emotion or saying a word. I imagined how she would continue to sit all alone in this room, knowing that it was her fault, but never being a person who was big enough to say that she was sorry or just accept that it was her fault. I went back home to Eve, a person who loved me, and burst into tears, something I'd never done in my entire life. I opened up to her, something I also never really did in detail, and I just told her everything for hours while she sat there and supported me. The next day, she took me out for an amazing day. We went to the movies, looked at ducks in the park, saw our friends, and then she did something unexpected in the evening. She got on her knee and proposed to me. It was so weird, and I didn't understand what was happening because, the guy's supposed to do that. But she didn't care because she thought it was wonderful how amazing I had turned out, despite my terrible upbringing. And she simply couldn't wait. It felt nice. And I said yes. I cut off all contact with my mother, and I haven't talked to her or visited her since. I don't think she deserves my love or attention after all she put me through. But I'm really, truly happy now. My life is not perfect, but I'm surrounded by Eve and my friends. People who really love me. Share in the comments if you have a similar experience to mine. I would like to see your opinions. Should I still keep in contact with my mother? Or did I do the right thing? Did I do
Sit down, because while you listen to my story, you'd better be seated. Do you think you've been in a creepy situation in your life? I'll tell you what happened once my friends and I went into the woods. Good God, I've got the creeps just saying the word woods. I am Jacob, and this is my most horrifying experience. It all started like a classic horror movie, and we were even joking about it. I was a teenager and lived in a very small town surrounded by woods. Of course, my friends and me were absolutely familiar with the forest close to our neighborhood, as we had visited it a million times since we were toddlers. One of us had his 16th birthday in June, and we decided to celebrate it camping overnight in the forest on our own, without the adults. It was not scary at all, as we knew the place we were going to perfectly. So after a day's walk in the woods, the 5 of us, 3 boys and 2 girls, set our tents at a nice clearing, cooked something, and then were just sitting around the fire chatting. It was very dark already, and to make things more thrilling, one of us decided to tell everyone a creepy story. He told us about a group of young people who went to the woods overnight, and strange things started happening, and they find out that they were stalked by a malicious witch. Wait, bro. Are you retelling us the script of the Blair Witch Project? Come on, we've all seen it. We were laughing a lot at him, as he didn't manage to scare us at all. But we decided not to go on with scary stories, as it was already late and it was time to go to sleep. I woke up because of the strange sound coming from outside. Did it seem like a nursery counting out rhyme told by some girl? I looked at the watch and snorted. It was 3 a.m. Why should my friends be awake at this time of night? Pretty irritated, I looked out of the tent to see that all the guys were looking out from their tents as well, including the girls. And the rhyme was still sounding from the forest not far from us. Hip dip doo, the cat's got the flu, the dog's got the chicken pox, so out goes you. I felt the goosebumps rising through my back towards my hair. What the hell was that? We gathered around the fireplace again, all close and united, while we were listening to that horrible voice moving away from us. We were no heroes of teenage horror, so we didn't have the slightest desire to go to the forest to explore. We thought maybe it was someone's prank, as many people knew where we were going. But it was a strange prank if so. In the darkness without a torch to sing nursery rhymes. We didn't get any sleep till dawn. At the sunrise, we decided that it was enough of fresh air for us, and that we wanted home. We were packing up, as one of the guys said, "Look at this tree, Jesus!" He was pointing at a tree nearby. Carved on its trunk there was a huge cross. No one seemed to remember it from the previous day. We were very scared now, and tried to convince ourselves that it had been there. We just hadn't noticed it. Anyway, we felt an urge to go home, because we felt there was something strange going on in that forest. So we rushed from the clearing to the path we knew so well that would bring us home. After half an hour's walk, one of the girls said, "Guys, I have no idea where we are, do you?" Problem is, no one of us had. We were just all sure that all the others recognized the path. The phones didn't have the connection there either. We got lost in the forest we knew on a path we had taken the day before. We lost our spirits and started arguing on what direction to take next. When one of the guys said, "Look, there's another cross on a tree." And there it was, freshly carved. Good Lord, we all screamed and ran away from that place without even considering the path. We were absolutely terrified, and the understanding that we were completely lost didn't help. After some time, we managed to calm down and started reasoning on what direction home was. We chose what was seemingly north and went there. We were walking and walking and walking, and the forest didn't seem to ever finish. Girls started sobbing, and us guys were close. We were supposed to return home at 3 p.m., and it was already close to 4. Our parents should have started to worry about where we were. Hopefully they would try to look for us. We were terrified by the thought that we would have to pass another night in that damned forest. It was close to 6 when we came to another clearing and thought we would take a break as we were very tired of endless walking. It was nearly sunset, and it was wise to remain there for another overnight, even if we dreaded the idea. We divided, looking for the best place for camping, when one of the girls called us in a trembling voice, "Guys, come here." She was pointing at a setting that made us all freeze. There were remains of a fireplace, a round, burnt-out spot, obviously fresh. Worst thing was that it was surrounded by small columns of stones put on one another, just small stone piles. and the closest tree was decorated by another cross. It looked more like some ritual place than a simple fireplace. This time, we screamed like in a good old B-movie and escaped without any direction, just as far away from that place as possible. The only thing we knew was that we needed to stick together to survive. We ran and ran, and it was the purest terror I had ever had. This time, we didn't manage to calm down and just ran ahead quickly without much thought and just exchanging brief phrases. When suddenly, nearly at the last ray of the day, I heard a familiar voice somewhere ahead of us. "Jacob, is that you?" God, at this point, I was about to faint of relief. It was my dad who came to look for us. He was startled to see us in that miserable condition as we fell out of the woods practically into his arms. As we explained what happened to us, he looked more and more puzzled. "But how could you kids have gotten lost? We're now just a mile away from home. You should have been wandering in circles." When we returned home, we told everything to our parents. Everyone was surprised as they didn't recognize the places we were describing and never heard of anything strange at all happen in our woods. We now prefer not to talk about that walk, and it's the first time I'm actually telling this story to anyone in detail. And believe me, I haven't been in the woods since, and I'm not sure I will ever find courage to turn back there in close future.